can continue. Is the voice projecting? So, any questions that came up from the morning's discussion? What is your name? Rick. I think we want to take this microphone.
So I had a question about citta, and so if citta is free of the hindrances and free of the disturbances,
Yep.
And is luminous, So I guess that is citta just inclined toward wholesome thoughts, or is there some way in which there's a natural state of citta that I thought you referred to that is some sort of Buddha nature?
Yeah, this idea or the statement that occurs in this sutta, maybe in other suttas from this early period, actually may have formed the basis that came to be developed in some of the schools of early Buddhism into the later doctrine of what is called Buddha nature. I think the way this idea of the mind is luminous, the way it came to be, can we put this light on here? Cortana is saying, ask me anything. That's what I wanted to ask her. How do I get rid of you? Okay. Okay. No. Okay, you see this statement from the commentary, the Bhavanga Citta is called luminous, that is pure. Okay, in some of the schools of early Buddhism, this idea that the mind is luminous becomes paraphrased with the statement that the mind is I think it's prakritya pari shuddhang. That it's naturally or intrinsically pure, that the mind by its very nature is pure. And then this, over time, evolves into the idea that there's this inherent purity of the mind, which is the Buddha nature. And so then the task of practice becomes not so much to purify the mind, but to realize the purity which is already there. So the defilements are like a surface layer which is covering up the intrinsic, inherent, ever-present purity of the mind. So that is a kind of starting point for the idea of, the intrinsic purity of the mind, so that this idea of the luminosity of the mind will evolve or develop into the idea of Buddha nature. There was some discussion of this. Let me just... Yeah, I think that this idea emerged in one of the early schools, which was a rival to the Pali school. It was called the Mahasangikas. They picked up this passage on the intrinsic luminosity or purity of the mind, and then developed it in the direction, they developed the idea of the intrinsic purity or luminosity of the mind, and then that became the starting point, which evolved into the Mahayana idea of the Buddha nature. Perhaps this is discussed by Venerable Yinshun in his treatise on the Buddha nature, or the Tathagata Garbha. It's the Tathagata Garbha theory, the idea that the mind is the Tathagata Garbha, the embryo of the Tathagata of the Buddha.
And how does that relate to citta?
This is the citta, that the citta is intrinsically, that there's a dimension of the citta which is the Tathagata or Buddha nature. And so the citta is to be within the sort of depths of the citta. There is already the nature of a fully enlightened Buddha. And so what practice is doing, it's not transforming the mind into an enlightened mind, but it's bringing to manifestation the enlightenment which is already inherently present within the mind.
And that relates to the same citta as in yoga, as in Patanjali's Yoga Sutta, the Yoga Citta Vritta Nirodha.
Yeah, I'm not really familiar with the yoga system of Patanjali, or just very, very, very superficially. Yeah, Michael, yeah. I don't think it's on. Yeah, now it's on, it's on.
Oh, thank you, thank you. I just wanted to ask whether you can point out any other examples of this particular idea within the Pali Canon.
Of the intrinsic luminosity of the mind?
Exactly.
I think this is all, I would say that this is quite unique in the Pali Canon. Yeah.
Hello? Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. I was wondering how this phrase relates to the first...
I think you lost the... Manopubanga Madhama, how it relates to the first... Yeah. I think that is because it's speaking about the three doors of action. Mano Pubangama Dhamma, Mano Seta Manomaya, Manasacha Padutena, Basativa Karotiva. So here we have mind as the forerunner of things. They are made by mind. The mind is the chief. They are made by mind. If one speaks or thinks with a defiled mind, if one speaks or thinks with a pure mind. So here the point is that before speech, before bodily action, there is mind or intention. So that shows the importance of mano as the precursor of, excuse me, sir, we are having a class here, and sort of your presence here is sort of a little disturbance to our class. Yeah, so the mind, considers first, before speaking and before acting bodily. So this, I think it serves a pedagogical function to emphasize the importance of making decisions before speaking and acting. Though in that verse, one could just as well have citta. Almost one could just as well put citta as mano.
Bhante, my question is also about citta. You say it's like a storehouse. That's your understanding, right? Because our common understanding is it's consciousness. That's especially after Yogacara school, it's the eighth, the sixth consciousness, the seventh and the eighth consciousness is the storehouse. So my question is, when you say citta is like the storehouse, that's your understanding coming from the Nikayas, is that right?
Okay, it's my understanding of how the citta is like a storehouse. Is that coming from the Nikayas? I think there's a passage that maybe can support this. Let me see if I can find it. I'm not sure if this suits the purpose, but you could say. Okay, one should often reflect upon one's own mind thus. For a long time this mind has been defiled by lust, hatred, and delusion. Through the defilements of the mind, beings are defiled. With the cleansing of the mind, beings are purified. Maybe it's not such a good example. But I think the idea here is that over a long time, lust, hatred, and delusion have been operating upon the mind, and so I would say that they're stored up within the mind over this long time, within the citta. I'll see if I can find other passages that illustrate this, but they don't immediately come to mind. But there's one derivation that sometimes comes in the commentaries of the word citta from the verb cinoti. Or cinati. Cinati mean to store up, to accumulate. So you could derive citta from cinati, as well as from cinteti, which means to think. It's not on.
I find the short suttas difficult. It's because it's out of context.
Yeah.
For example, so that it's not it's unlike those suttas in Majjhima Nikaya. We have the situation, so you can understand, interpret the sutta within that framework.
Yeah.
But this so short. These suttas are so short, so there's no way to interpret them out of depending on the context. If we take the citta is luminous, if I put it into the framework of meditation, then I would think, okay, then those defilements are the 5 hindrances. But if I take it into the context of the, even taking into the vipassana part, then I would think, okay, the citta is like the sky, and the defilements are like maybe the clouds. And whether the clouds have to be removed, the clouds could be there, but if you don't think they are substantial, then the mind with clouds could still be understood as luminous.
Say again, I didn't quite get it.
I think to understand the citta as luminous, depends on the framework.
Yeah.
If it's within the samadhi framework, then after the meditator achieve a certain level, of course, you can see the light. So that means it's luminous.
Yeah.
But if you put it into the vipassana framework, then the mind, whether the defilements have to be removed in order to make the citta luminous, could be two interpretations. One is the citta is like the sky, and the defilements or the adventitious defilements are like clouds.
Yeah.
So whether the clouds should be removed depends on how you interpret. If the clouds are for those not unlearning, not noble disciple, for those common people, they think they are defilements. But if you think they are lack of the substantiality, then the clouds could be there, and still the mind could be luminous.
Mm-hmm.
So I find that it's so difficult to interpret those short suttas. It's because
it's because there's no context. Yeah, I know. That's you would say from one point of view, that's what makes them interesting. And maybe this is what one of the things maybe that led to the arising of many different schools of Buddhism and different systems of interpretation. Like different schools would pick out these individual suttas from like collections like Anguttara Nikaya, Samyutta Nikaya, and say this supports our point of view. And then they would build bodies of interpretation on the basis of these individual suttas, or quote these individual suttas to support their point of view. And so this is what makes, I would say this is what makes exposition of the suttas, for me, interesting and fun. And it's also where, I would say, one has to be careful, very careful, at least in my point of view, to have a fairly comprehensive knowledge of at least a wide range of suttas, so that one can see any individual sutta against the background of a wide range of other suttas, so that one could interpret it correctly, or at least correctly from one's own point of view. Like this sutta about the luminous mind, like the way I would interpret it would be, as I pointed out, in relation to the sutta from the book of Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Fives, which I think is the key to understanding it correctly. That it's to be understood in relation to, by way of the simile of the 5 defilements of gold, which the gold by its own nature is luminous, but the 5 other metals defile that gold so that the gold doesn't appear, the metal that one has, the gold ore, doesn't appear luminous because of the other metals. But when we remove the other metals, then the intrinsic luminosity of the gold appears. And so the mind, by its own nature, is luminous. It doesn't mean that the mind is enlightened, in my opinion, that the mind is inherently enlightened, or that the mind is inherently, intrinsically a Buddha, in my opinion. But it's just that the mind has this luminosity. It's the luminosity that appears in samadhi. It doesn't mean that the mind has the panya or prajna, the wisdom, but it has this luminous nature. And so that luminous nature is what's clouded over by the 5 hindrances. And so when through the proper development of samatha or samadhi, or even vipassana, the preliminary stages of vipassana, when the 5 hindrances are removed, then that inherent luminosity of the mind appears. And then that the mind with that luminosity becomes adaptable, wieldy, malleable, flexible, powerful. And then one can use that mind for various purposes, for the various kinds of psychic power, or to go on to reach the destruction of the asavas. And there's another sutta where the word pabasara occurs. Do you want to see what that other sutta is? It's in the Majjhima Nikaya. It's sutta number 140. Okay. Okay, this is where the Buddha is teaching this young ascetic. His name is Pukusati. He first teaches him the meditation on the 4 elements. Then he teaches him meditation on the space element. Then he teaches him meditation on the consciousness element. Then from the conscious element he goes to feeling, and then from feeling he takes equanimity. And then he says from equanimity, he says, there remains only equanimity, purified and bright, malleable, wieldy, and here the translation uses radiant, but it's the same word, pabasar in Pali, pabasarang. And also it uses the simile of the goldsmith. Suppose a goldsmith were to prepare a furnace, heat up the crucible, take some gold with tongs and put it into the crucible, and from time to time he would blow on it and so forth until that gold would become refined, well refined, completely refined, rid of dross, malleable, wieldy, and radiant. Then whatever kind of ornament he wished to make from it, it would serve his purpose. So too, then there remains only equanimity, purified and bright, malleable, wieldy, and radiant or luminous. And so then he goes on, if I were to direct this equanimity, so purified and bright, to the base of infinite space, and to develop my mind accordingly, then this equanimity of mind, supported by that base, clinging to it, would remain for a very long time, and so forth. So in each case, he can go to higher and higher stages within the 4 formless realms. So this is the equanimity of the 4 formless meditations. So here the luminosity of the mind is appearing in the formless stages of samadhi, probably appearing first in the 4th jhana, or becoming perfected in the 4th jhana, and then moving on to the four formless meditative absorptions. Oh, I see. Okay, sorry. Is the Yogačara's eighth consciousness enlightened? Is that what it says? The same as the Anguttara Nikaya's luminous mind? I think one would need somebody who knows the Yogačara Bhumi and who would be able to see whether the Yogačara Bhumi, because I don't know the Yogačara Bhumi, who would be able to track down whether the Yogačara Bhumi tries to ground the concept of the eighth consciousness in a citation of texts from the early suttas that from texts that correspond to the Anguttara Nikaya, citing passages that correspond to this particular sutta on the luminous mind. This would be a matter for an expert on the Yogačara Bhumi, which I don't have any knowledge of the Yogačara Bhumi. Okay, we could take one more question if there is such a question. Since there is no such question, then we can end for the day. Okay, so let us end then with the three more half bows to the Buddha.